The ghost ship wasn't supposed to exist. That was the first rule of deep salvage. If the score sounds too good to be true, it's a lie wrapped around a plasma mine. And the Wanderer, a pre-Federation colony vessel lost to the void over a century ago, was the grandest lie of them all. We'd all heard the stories in a dozen asteroid bars, from Ceres to the Oort Cloud, a ship loaded with pristine colonial-era tech, untouched resources, and the data cores of humanity's first real push to the stars. A legend, a siren song for desperate men in patched-up rust buckets. My ship, the Vulture, was one such rust bucket, and my crew and I were just that desperate. We floated in the silent dark of the Kuiper Belt, a place where light from Sol was just another star, and the only law was what you could enforce with an active railgun. For 3 weeks, we'd been chasing whispers, following the faint trail of distorted gravity readings that no sane person would bother with. My navigator, Anya, a woman whose nerves were as frayed as the wires she coaxed into life, thought I was insane. "There's nothing out here, Gale," she'd said, her voice a low hum through the ship's comms, her face a pale mask in the glow of her console. "We're burning fuel. We don't have to chase a ghost story. Even the pirates don't come this far out." She was right, of course. But I had a feeling, a cold knot in my gut that felt less like intuition and more like a shard of ice. I'd learned long ago to trust that feeling. It was the only thing that had kept me alive after my discharge from the Earth Defense Fleet. A part of my life I'd buried so deep it barely felt real anymore. My heavy, Jax, a mountain of a man whose cybernetic arm whirred softly as he polished his scattergun, just grunted, "If we find it, we're rich. If we don't, we die in the cold." Same odds as any other Tuesday. He wasn't wrong either. That was life on the fringe. Then the impossible happened. A ping on the long-range scanner, faint and intermittent. Not a ship, but a mass. A big one. Cold. Dead. And exactly where the legend said the Wanderer had made its final, silent jump. We crept closer, our ship's systems running on whisper mode, every plate on the hull groaning in protest against the cold. And there it was. It wasn't just a ship. It was a tomb the size of a city block, hanging in the void like a monument to forgotten ambition. Its design was archaic, a brutalist slab of steel and ceramic, scarred by micrometeoroids but otherwise perfectly intact. No hull breaches, no signs of a battle, just silent. Too silent. No power signature, no heat, no emissions of any kind. Anya whispered, her eyes wide. It's like it was switched off 100 years ago and never touched. My hand went to the grip of the sidearm, holstered on my thigh. The ice in my gut twisted. Prep the boarding tube. "Jax, you're with me. Anya, stay on the scope. If you see so much as a flicker from that thing, you burn space and don't look back." Understood. She just nodded, her focus already locked on her screen. Jax hefted his gun, the heavy thud of his mag boots echoing on the grated floor of the airlock. "Let's go wake the dead," he rumbled. The hiss of the airlock was the last familiar sound we heard. When the outer door of the Vulture clamped onto the Wanderer's hull with a magnetic thud, a different kind of silence took over. It was a heavy, profound emptiness that seemed to press in on us, to suck the very sound from the air. We cut through the outer hull, the whine of the plasma torch unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. Inside, the emergency lights were on, casting long, distorted shadows down a main corridor. The air was stale but breathable. The life support somehow still functioning on a low residual power, but the wrongness was immediate. There was no dust. In 100 years, a ship accumulates a fine layer of grime, of shed skin cells, of mechanical decay. This place was pristine. The floors gleamed under our helmet lamps. The walls were polished, and there was a faint, cloying smell in the air, something like ozone and overripe fruit. We moved cautiously, our weapons sweeping every corner. The ship was a maze of residential corridors, communal halls, and engineering bays, all of it built on a scale that spoke of hope, of a future where humanity had room to spare. But there were no people, no bodies, no skeletons in vac suits, no bloodstains on the walls, nothing to explain what had happened to the 5,000 souls aboard. We found the first one in the mess hall. It was fused to the wall, as if it had melted into the bulkhead. At first, I thought it was some kind of strange art, a sculpture of polished, pearlescent material that swirled in intricate patterns. Then Jax moved his light, and we saw the shape within it, a human hand, its fingers elongated and twisted, reaching out from the opalescent mass. A face, its features stretched and serene, its eyes wide open and milky white, locked in a gaze of placid horror. The body was integrated, part of the ship. We backed away slowly, the bile rising in my throat. What in the hell is that Jax breathed? His usual bravado gone, replaced by a deep, guttural revulsion. We found more of them. Dozens. A man and a woman fused together into a graceful archway leading to the hydroponics bay, their limbs woven together like vines. A child curled into a sphere of the same pearlescent bone, embedded in the ceiling of a nursery, surrounded by smaller spheres that might have been toys or other children. They weren't dead, not in the way I understood it. They were repurposed. Their flesh and bone had been unmade and remade into something else, something both beautiful and utterly monstrous. The smell was stronger here, thick and sweet. This wasn't a tomb, it was a gallery. We were walking through an art installation crafted from human bodies. The silence of the ship was no longer empty, it was watchful. My military training screamed at me, every instinct telling me this was a trap, a lure. We needed to get out. But the lure of the bridge, of the data core that held the answers, was too strong. We had to know. The bridge was at the heart of the ship, and it was the most pristine place of all. The command chairs were empty, the consoles dark, but in the center of the room, a single terminal glowed with a soft, blue light. Floating above it was a data core, a crystalline matrix humming with contained energy. And sitting in the captain's chair, facing the terminal, was the only body on the ship that wasn't part of the walls. He was old, his captain's uniform immaculate, his skin waxy and translucent. But he wasn't fused to anything. He was just sitting there, a look of profound, soul-shattering despair on his face. In his lap was a standard-issue sidearm, the kind they hadn't used in 80 years. A single clean hole was drilled through his temple. He had been the lucky one. Jack stood guard at the door while I approached the terminal. The moment my gloved fingers touched the console, it flared to life. A log file opened, a video feed flickering into existence. The face of a woman, her science officer's insignia pinned to her collar, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and scientific awe. Chief Science Officer Eris Thorne. Final log, she began, her voice trembling but clear. They answered our hail. They called themselves the Architects. They were magnificent. Their ship, it wasn't built, it was grown. It was a living thing of light and crystal. They offered us a gift. They called it integration, a way to transcend the limitations of our flesh, to become part of a greater, perfect design. The video flickered. Behind her, I could see the chaos starting. People screaming, not in pain, but in a kind of ecstatic confusion as their bodies began to change, their skin taking on that pearlescent sheen. They said we were flawed. Aris continued, tears now streaming down her face. Imperfect, a chaotic species born from a violent world. They said our ferocity, our survival instinct, it was a disease. They called Earth a death world, a failed experiment. They weren't here to kill us. They were here to correct us, to sculpt us into something worthy, something silent, something beautiful. The feed distorted, and for a moment, I saw one of them. It was tall and slender, its form shifting like heat haze, its presence seeming to bend the light around it. It had no face, no features, just a smooth, white surface that radiated a sense of absolute, unimpeachable authority. It reached out a long, multi-jointed limb, not toward Eris, but toward the man next to her. His body convulsed, and he began to melt, his form flowing like wax into the floor, reshaping itself into one of those horrifyingly beautiful patterns. They're not conquerors. Eris sobbed, her voice breaking. They're artists, and we are their clay. This isn't a culling. It's a harvest. We sent them everything, our history, our biology, the location of Saul. They know where we came from. They are coming for our world, not to destroy it, but to perfect it. God help us all. The log ended. The data core pulsed, its light intensifying. And then, far too late, I heard Anya's voice screaming in my ear. Kyle, get out of there. I've got a massive energy signature building right on top of you. It's not a ship. It's a distortion in space. The ship around us groaned, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through my bones. The emergency lights flickered and died, replaced by a soft, internal luminescence emanating from the walls, from the bodies of the sculpted crew. The Wanderer was waking up. It had never been dead. It had been sleeping, waiting. I grabbed the data core, yanking it from its housing. An alarm blared, a soft, melodic chime that was infinitely more terrifying than a klaxon. Jax, we're leaving! Now I yelled, turning to run. But Jax was no longer watching the door. He was staring at his own cybernetic arm. The metal plating was peeling back, and underneath, his flesh was beginning to glow with that same pearlescent light. It's in the air, he whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. It's been in the air the whole time. He looked at me, his face a mask of dawning horror, and then he raised his scattergun, not at the door, but at his own shoulder. The blast was deafening in the enclosed space, severing the arm at the bicep. He screamed, a raw, human sound of pure agony, and stumbled back, clutching the cauterized stump. The chime of the alarm grew louder. We half dragged, half carried him back through the glowing, watchful corridors, the beautiful and silent faces of the crew following our desperate flight. We threw ourselves through the hole we'd cut, sealing the airlock behind us just as the Wanderer's hull began to ripple, to reshape itself. I slammed the Vulture's thrusters to full, the ship screaming in protest as we tore away from the awakened ghost ship. On the main screen, The distortion in space resolved itself. It was a ship, but like none I had ever seen. It was a needle of black crystal, kilometers long, that seemed to drink the light around it. It didn't turn to follow us. It simply was. From its tip, a lance of pure darkness shot out. Not a laser, not a missile, but a wave of physical emptiness that erased a section of the asteroid field as if it had never been. It missed us by meters. Anya pushed the drive until the safeties screamed, and we jumped. A blind, desperate tear in space-time that threw us tumbling into the dark. When we came out, the ship was a wreck, and Jax was unconscious, bleeding out on the floor. But we were alive, and I held in my hand a crystal data core containing a truth so monstrous it could burn the galaxy down. The architects were not just coming. In a way, they were already here. They were in our system, posing as benevolent saviors, and Earth's own government was welcoming them with open arms. We weren't scavengers anymore. We were witnesses, and in a galaxy that rewarded silence, we were the only ones who knew how to scream. The jump was like being shoved through a meat grinder made of space-time. We came out of it broken, spinning in a dead sector of space where the stars were cold. Unfamiliar eyes. The vulture was screaming. Alarms wailed a chorus of catastrophic failure. Red lights strobing across a cockpit, thick with the smell of ozone and burnt wiring. On the deck, Jax was a heap of blood-soaked metal and flesh, his breathing a shallow, ragged gargle. Anya was white-knuckling the helm, her face a mask of sweat and terror, fighting to stabilize our tumble. Main reactor containment is failing. Life support is offline in sectors 3 and 4. We're venting atmosphere from the cargo bay, she yelled, her voice strained over the cacophony. I ignored it all. My world had shrunk to the man bleeding out at my feet. I ripped open our only medkit, its contents meager and pathetic against the scale of his injury. His stump was a mess of cauterized flesh, shredded muscle, and shattered bone. The blast had saved him from the architect's touch, but it had nearly torn him in half. "Jax, stay with me," I shouted, slapping a coagulant patch over the wound. It was like putting a bandage on a volcano. He groaned, his one good eye fluttering open. "Did we get it?" he rasped, his gaze fixed on the crystalline data core I still clutched in my hand. "We got it," I said, my voice tight. "Now shut up and don't die." For the next 6 hours, the cockpit of the Vulture became a makeshift operating theater and a repair bay, while Anya rerouted power from non-essential systems and patched the hull with emergency sealant. I worked on Jax. I wasn't a doctor, but I'd seen enough battlefield trauma in the EDF to know the basics. I sedated him with a dangerously high dose of painkillers, cleaned the wound as best I could, and fused the torn arteries shut with a plasma welder set on low. It was brutal, ugly work. And by the end of it, the deck was slick with his blood and my sweat. He was alive, barely. His life hanging by the thread of a failing stasis pod. We jury-rigged in the corner. We were alive, too. But we were crippled, adrift, and holding a bomb. The data core sat on the console between us, pulsing with a soft, malevolent light. It was more than just a log file. It was a death sentence. We couldn't go to an Earth-controlled port. Eris Thorne's message had made it clear the government was compromised, welcoming the architects into the fold. We couldn't go to the military. They'd classify the core, bury it under a mountain of bureaucracy, and we'd disappear into a black site interrogation room. "There's one place," Anya said finally, her voice hollow with exhaustion as she looked up from her navigation charts. "Harrow's Rift. It's a hollowed-out asteroid on the edge of the TRAPPIST system. Black market. No questions asked. If we can find parts to fix the reactor, it'll be there. But, Kyle, it's not a friendly place." I looked at Jax, his face pale and still in the stasis field, and then at the data core. "We don't need friendly," I said. "We need a ghost." It took us 2 weeks to limp to Harrow's Rift, a journey of constant, nerve-shredding repairs and silent dread. The station was a scar on the void, a jagged chunk of rock teeming with scavenged habitats and docking bays, all glowing with the garish neon of vice and desperation. It was a haven for pirates, smugglers, and anyone else who had a good reason to stay off the grid. We docked in a forgotten corner of the station, paying the exorbitant docking fee with the last of our refined metals. I left Anya to guard the ship and Jax, her hand never straying far from the plasma pistol tucked into her belt. My mission was to find Silas. Silas wasn't a person so much as a rumor, a data ghost who lived in the station's digital underbelly. They said he could crack any encryption, pull any file, and that he valued information above all else, especially information the powers that be wanted to keep buried. I found him in a noodle bar in the lowest level of the rift, a place where the air was a thick soup of recycled oxygen, synthetic steam, and regret. He was a wiry man with pale skin and eyes that held the jittery, unfocused intensity of someone who spent more time in the data stream than the real world. He was surrounded by a web of flickering holographic screens, his fingers dancing across invisible keyboards. "I need you to look at something," I said, sitting down opposite him without an invitation. I placed the architect data core on the table between us. It pulsed, casting strange, shifting patterns on his face. He didn't even glance at it. His eyes darted across his screens, tracking stock prices on illegal arms deals and encrypted fleet movements. "I'm busy," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "And whatever that is, it feels loud. It's drawing attention. I don't like attention. It's pre-Federation. From the colony ship Wanderer," I said. "That got him." His fingers froze. His gaze slowly, reluctantly, moved from his screens to the crystal in my hand. His eyes, for the first time, focused. He saw the intricate, non-Euclidean geometry of its structure, the way the light seemed to move within it, not through it. "That's not possible," he breathed. "The Wanderer is a myth." "The myth is real," I said, leaning forward, "and the story of how it ended is on this core. But there's more. Alien data. Something new. Something wrong." His greed warred with his paranoia, and greed won. "My price is a full, unredacted copy of everything on it," he said, his eyes now glued to the core. "And you pay for my time in military-grade ship components, the kind you can't buy over a counter." "Done," I said, "but we do it on my ship." And this conversation never happened. He led me through a labyrinth of back alleys and service tunnels to a dusty, forgotten corner of the station where he kept his real hardware. He was a dealer in secrets, and I had just brought him the secret of the century. We returned to the Vulture, and for the next 10 hours, Silas worked, his portable console jacked directly into the core. Anya watched him like a hawk, while I stood over them both, the weight of what I was doing pressing down on me. As Silas peeled back the layers of the core, The story became so much worse. It wasn't just Eris Thorne's final terrified log. The architects had used the Wanderer's own systems to record their work. The core was filled with their data, their logs, their philosophy. We watched in horrified silence as Silas projected the files onto the main screen. We saw schematics of human biology, annotated with cold, clinical precision, highlighting our flaws, our adrenal response, our capacity for rage, our tribalistic loyalty. They had studied us like a bacterium. And then came the term, repeated over and over in their elegant, flowing script, Death World. They saw Earth not as a cradle of life, but as a crucible of violence, a place where survival was a constant, brutal struggle. They believed this environment had warped us, hard-coded our very DNA, with a savagery that was a threat to the cosmic balance. Their integration wasn't a punishment, in their view. It was a mercy, an act of cosmic weeding. "They're already here," Silas whispered, his face ashen. He pulled up a public news feed from Seoul. The headline was plastered everywhere. "The emissaries arrive, a new era of peace and technological advancement." The footage showed it all. A sleek, beautiful ship. Nothing like the black crystal needle we had seen, but clearly of the same design philosophy, hanging in orbit over Earth. Aliens, tall and graceful in shimmering environmental suits, descending to meet a delegation of Earth's leaders. They weren't calling themselves the architects. They were the emissaries, and they were offering cures for diseases, clean energy, the secrets to faster-than-light travel without the instability of jump drives. They were offering paradise. And humanity was on its knees, welcoming them as gods. "It's a lie," Anya breathed, a gilded cage. "It's the perfect invasion," Silas said, looking at me, anew, cold fear in his eyes. "They're not conquering Earth. They're seducing it. And anyone who speaks out, anyone who calls them a threat, they'll be branded a terrorist, a warmonger trying to ruin paradise." He was right. And we were the only ones with the proof. The truth wasn't a weapon. It was a suicide note. As if on cue, a proximity alert blared. Anya spun to her console. "Call, we've got ships approaching. Fast. 3 of them. No transponders, but they're flying military-grade interceptors with Earth Gov markings." My blood ran cold. I looked at Silas. His face was a mask of pure terror. He hadn't just copied the data. His system was networked. The moment he'd accessed the core's deepest files, he'd triggered a silent alarm, a beacon buried by the architects themselves. He hadn't sold us out. He had accidentally announced our location to the entire system. "They're not EarthGov," I snarled, drawing my sidearm. "They're compliance, the ones who do the dirty work." We had seconds. I grabbed Silas by the collar. "Can you wipe the station's docking logs? Make it look like we were never here." He nodded frantically, his fingers flying across a handheld datapad. "Done, but they're locking down the rift. They'll have a perimeter set up in minutes." "Anya, get Jax back into the medbay and strap him down. Give me everything the engines have left." I shoved the precious data core into a shielded pouch on my belt. The first impacts rocked the ship. They weren't trying to disable us. They were trying to kill us. Magnetic clamps fired from the docking station, locking onto our hull. "I can't break free!" Anya yelled, the engines screaming as they fought against the clamps. Through the cockpit viewport, I saw them. Black-clad soldiers in sleek, faceless helmets rappelling down from their ships. They moved with a chilling, inhuman efficiency. They weren't soldiers. They were exterminators. "They're cutting through the hull," Silas screamed, backing away from the door. I turned to him. "Sorry about this," I said, and hit him hard across the jaw, knocking him unconscious. I couldn't risk him talking. I couldn't risk leaving a loose end. Then I looked at Anya. "Remember that old mining trick you told me about, overloading the fusion converters?" A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. It was the first time I'd seen her smile in weeks. "It'll tear the whole docking bay apart," she said. "And probably us with it." "Just get us clear," I said, taking up a position by the door, my rifle pressed to my shoulder. The whine of a plasma torch cut through the outer hull. I took a deep breath, the familiar cold calm of combat settling over me. I thought of the serene, horrified faces on the Wanderer. I thought of the term death world. The architects thought our savagery was a flaw. They thought our will to survive, to fight, to tear down the universe to protect our own, was a disease. They were about to get a lesson in pathology. The door burst inward, and the black-clad figures swarmed in, their weapons raised. I opened fire, and in that moment, under the artificial lights of a lawless station, surrounded by enemies both human and existential, our war began. We weren't scavengers anymore. We were the disease, and we were about to go viral. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of violence. The compliance troopers swarmed through the breach, their movements silent and economical, a stark contrast to the roaring chaos of my pulse rifle. The first two went down, their black armor sparking as plasma bolts chewed through their chest plates. But three more took their place, laying down a storm of suppressor fire that stitched sizzling holes in the bulkhead behind me. I dove behind a cargo crate, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and cooked air. "Anya!" Now I screamed into the comm. The ship lurched, a violent, gut-wrenching shudder that threw one of the troopers off his feet. A deep, resonant hum filled the deck, the sound of a star being born in the belly of our ship. The fusion converters were going critical. Through the viewport, I saw the docking bay lights flicker and die. The magnetic clamps holding us sputtered, their power cut by the surge Anya was unleashing. 30 seconds to detonation, she yelled, her voice strained with the G-forces of the dying ship. That was our window, a lifetime and an instant. I burst from cover, firing from the hip. It wasn't about accuracy anymore. It was about suppression, about making them hesitate for a fraction of a second. A stray round caught me in the shoulder, a searing pain that spun me around and slammed me against the wall. My vision swam in a sea of red. I saw a trooper level his rifle at my head, his faceless helmet a black mirror reflecting my own impending death. Then, a blur of motion. Anya. She had left the cockpit, a plasma pistol in each hand, her face a mask of cold fury. She fired twice, the bolts hitting the trooper square in the visor, melting it into a slag of smoking plastic and cooked flesh. She grabbed my arm, hauling me to my feet. "Move," she screamed, dragging me towards the cockpit. Behind us, the hum of the reactors rose to an unbearable shriek. We scrambled into our seats just as the ship tore free from the last of the clamps. Anya slammed the thrusters to maximum, and the Vulture shot out of the docking bay like a bullet from a gun. The last thing I saw on the rear view screen was the docking bay erupting in a silent, brilliant flower of white-hot plasma. The explosion was immense, a miniature supernova that vaporized the compliance interceptors and a significant chunk of Harrow's rift. The shockwave hit us like a physical blow, sending us tumbling end over end into the black. For the second time in as many weeks, we were broken, bleeding, and running for our lives. But this time was different. Before, we were just witnesses. Now, we were fugitives with a body count. We had declared war on an enemy we didn't understand and its powerful human collaborators. The next few hours were a blur of pain and frantic activity. Anya, with a grim determination I'd never seen in her before, managed to stabilize the ship. The explosion had cauterized most of our hull breaches but had fried half our systems. We were flying on manual, with no navigation, no long-range comms, and a reactor that was barely holding itself together. I patched myself up, the raw pain in my shoulder a constant, angry reminder of how close we'd come. Silas was still unconscious, zip-tied in the storage locker. I couldn't afford to let him go, but I couldn't bring myself to kill him either. He was a loose end, a liability, but he was also a victim. Jax was the worst. The G-forces and the shockwave had thrown his stasis pod across the med bay. He was out of stasis, awake and screaming, the pain of his severed arm and the trauma of the escape pushing him to the edge of madness. It took both me and Anya to hold him down and sedate him again, his raw, animal cries echoing in the silent, damaged ship. We were adrift, a ghost ship crewed by the walking wounded, and we were utterly, terrifyingly alone. "They'll be hunting us," Anya said, her voice flat, her eyes scanning the starfield outside the viewport as if expecting a fleet to appear at any moment. "They know who we are. They know what we have. They'll use EarthGov's full resources, the EDF, compliance, intelligence networks. There's nowhere in civilized space we can hide." "Then we don't go to civilized space," I said, my mind racing, sorting through old contacts, discarded allegiances, the ghosts of my past. "There's a place, a man, General Valerius." Anya turned to look at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Valerius, the butcher of Cygnus X-Wing, the EDF general who was court-martialed for unsanctioned warfare. He's a myth. Kyle, a boogeyman the military uses to scare new recruits. They say he went rogue, disappeared into the uncharted territories decades ago." "He's real," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I served under him. He wasn't a butcher. He was a pragmatist. He saw something coming, something he called the extrasolar threat. He argued for a more aggressive, preemptive defense strategy. He wanted to build a hidden fleet, off-grid, away from the politicians and their treaties. They called him a warmonger, a paranoid relic. They drummed him out of the service and erased him from the history books. But Valerius had taught me everything I knew about asymmetrical warfare. He taught me how to fight when you're outgunned, outnumbered, and backed into a corner. He taught me that in a war for survival, there are no rules. He had a contingency, a fallback point he called Ethelgard. It was a secret base, a listening post hidden in a nebula on the very edge of explored space. It was a place to go when the universe turned against you. It was a desperate, insane gamble, but it was the only one we had. "Can you find it?" Anya asked, a flicker of something like hope in her tired eyes. "His coordinates were locked in my head with a mem key," I said. "I can find it." Getting there was an odyssey through hell. We had to navigate through pirate-infested sectors and asteroid fields that would shred a fully functional ship, let alone our crippled wreck. We flew dark, rationing power, our lives measured in the slow, steady drip of our remaining oxygen, and the fluctuating energy signature of our dying reactor. I woke Silas and interrogated him. He was terrified, broken, but under the threat of being spaced. He told me everything. Compliance wasn't just a black ops unit, it was a cult, a secret society within Earth's command structure that had been co-opted by the architects, or emissaries, as they were now known. They were true believers, convinced that humanity's only path to salvation was through the integration the architects offered. They were the gatekeepers, silencing any dissent, eliminating any threat to the emissaries' grand plan. They were a fifth column, and they had already won. As we traveled, we monitored the public data streams. The architects' seduction of Earth was proceeding at a terrifying pace. They were hailed as saviors. Sickness was disappearing. Poverty was being eradicated. Humanity was being lulled into a state of blissful, grateful submission. Any news of the incident at Harrow's Rift was suppressed, written off as a pirate turf war. We were ghosts, our existence denied by the very people we were trying to save. During the long, silent hours of the journey, I started to study the data core myself. With Silas's help, I delved deeper into the architects' files. They were more than just artists or philosophers. They were cosmic gardeners of a sort, and their garden was the entire galaxy. They had logs stretching back millennia, detailing their encounters with dozens of other species. The pattern was always the same. They would observe, analyze, and then perfect. Species they deemed worthy were uplifted, their evolution guided. Those they deemed flawed, chaotic, or a threat the Deathworlders were harvested, their biological and cultural essence absorbed and repurposed, their worlds rendered sterile and silent. What was happening to Earth wasn't new. It was a cycle, and we were just the latest crop. After a month that felt like a lifetime, we found it. Ethel Guard. It was a ghost. A station carved into the heart of a colossal rogue asteroid, hidden within the swirling, sensor-baffling gases of the Serpent's Veil Nebula. There were no lights, no docking signals, only a single, tight beam frequency broadcasting a repeating code. A code I hadn't heard in 20 years. This is former EDF Captain Kalen Rook of the Vulture. I broadcast, my voice raw, requesting permission to approach. I'm calling in a blood debt. General. For a long, heart-stopping minute, there was only silence. Then, a voice crackled back, distorted by static, but as cold and sharp as I remembered. A blood debt is a heavy coin, Captain. Land on Pad 7 and be prepared to justify the cost. The asteroid opened up, revealing a hidden hangar bay. As we landed, the bay was surrounded by soldiers. They weren't wearing EDF uniforms. They wore patched up, non-standard gear, their faces grim, their weapons a motley collection of military surplus and custom-built hardware. These were the forgotten ones, the exiles, the true believers who had followed a disgraced general into the wilderness. Valerius was waiting for us at the bottom of the ramp. He hadn't aged so much as weathered, like a rock cliff battered by a century of storms. His hair was iron gray, his face a road map of scars, but his eyes were the same cold, intelligent, and utterly unforgiving. He took in the state of our ship, my own patched-up wound, and the med stretcher carrying the unconscious form of Jax, now with a crude but functional prosthetic where his arm used to be, cobbled together from spare parts by Anya. "You look like hell, Rook," Valerius said, his voice devoid of warmth. "The universe is a messy place." "General," I replied. "I brought you something," I said, holding out the Architect data core. "I brought you proof that you were right." Valerius took the core, his gaze fixed on its alien structure. He turned it over in his hands, his expression unreadable. He then looked up at me, his eyes boring into mine. "Proof is a dangerous thing." "Captain, it gets people killed." "It's a little late for that," I said. He led us into the heart of the station. Athelgard wasn't just a listening post. It was a fortress, a hidden military base humming with the energy of a small, dedicated army. It was a testament to one man's paranoia, a paranoia that had just been proven terrifyingly sane. In the war room, surrounded by holographic maps and tactical displays, we showed him everything: the Wanderer, the Architects, the Integration, the Emissaries' seduction of Earth, the Compliance Troopers. As the final horrifying images from the data core faded from the screen, the room was silent. Valerius stood with his back to us, staring at a star chart of the Sol system. "They called it a death world," I said softly. "They think our will to fight is a flaw to be corrected." Valerius turned, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes besides cold pragmatism. It was a fire, a deep, burning rage that had been banked for decades. "Our will to fight is the only thing that has ever kept us alive," he said, his voice a low growl. "They have mistaken our home for a garden to be weeded. They are about to learn that you do not weed a world that has learned to burn." He looked at me, at Anya, at the schematics of our broken ship. "You haven't brought me proof, Captain," he said, a grim, terrible smile touching his lips. "You've brought me a target list, and you've brought me a reason to finally unleash hell." The game had changed. We were no longer running. We were no longer hiding. We had found the last bastion of human defiance in a galaxy that was falling asleep, and under the command of a disgraced general at the head of a ghost army, we were about to become the galaxy's worst nightmare. Ethelgard became the forge of our retribution. The station, a monument to Valerius's prescient paranoia, transformed from a silent watchtower into a buzzing hive of war preparation. The arrival of the Vulture and the Edoris data core was the spark that ignited a 2-decade-old powder keg. Valerius's ghost army was a collection of the disillusioned, the disgraced, and the damned. Former EDF soldiers who'd been cast out for questioning the official doctrine of peace and appeasement. Intelligence analysts who'd seen the cracks in the facade. Engineers who'd built weapons too effective for a peacetime military. They were the Cassandras of the fleet, and now their prophecies had come home to roost in the most horrifying way imaginable. Our ship was torn apart and rebuilt, not just repaired. The engineers of Ethelgard, free from the constraints of military regulations and budgets, worked miracles. They integrated salvaged alien tech with brutal human ingenuity, turning the Vulture from a battered scavenger into a lean, predatory assassin. They replaced our failing reactor with a compact singularity drive, reverse-engineered from a derelict vessel found in the nebula. They armored our hull with adaptive ceramic plates that could ripple to deflect energy blasts. They gave us weapons that existed only in theoretical papers back on Earth. Anya was in paradise. She worked alongside Valerius's top techs, her mind, once frayed by desperation, now laser-focused and brilliant. She redesigned our sensor suites, creating a system that could sniff out the subtle space-time distortions of architect technology. She was no longer just a navigator, she was becoming a hunter. Jax healed, slowly but with a grim, new purpose. The crude prosthetic Anya had built was replaced with a state-of-the-art combat cybernetic, a gleaming black metal limb that could punch through a bulkhead or perform microsurgery. The experience on the Wanderer had broken something in him, but what grew back was harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. He spent his days in the firing range, calibrating his new arm, his eyes burning with a silent, obsessive fury. He rarely spoke, but his presence was a constant, simmering threat. He was no longer just our heavy, he was our conscience, a living reminder of what the architects did to the human form. I became Valerius's right hand, the bridge between our first-hand experience and his strategic genius. We spent days locked in the war room, the data core's contents projected in holographic streams around us. We dissected the architects' technology, their philosophy, their tactics. Their greatest strength was their subtlety, their ability to pacify and assimilate without firing a shot. They were surgeons, and they were excising humanity's will to resist. To fight them head-on is to lose, Valerius said, his voice a low rumble as he gestured towards a projection of the emissary ship in orbit around Earth. They control the narrative. They are saviors. We would be monsters, terrorists destroying a golden age. We can't fight their army because their army is humanity's own hope. So we don't fight their army, I countered, an idea taking shape in the back of my mind, born from my own history as a scavenger. We bleed their supply lines. We don't attack their warships. We attack their infrastructure, the things they need to maintain the illusion. Our first target was a deep space relay station near Jupiter, a massive communications hub that the emissaries had gifted to Earth. It was the linchpin of their propaganda machine, beaming their message of peace and progress across the Sol system. Officially, it was a civilian installation. Unofficially, as Anya's new sensors revealed, it was broadcasting on a tightly encrypted subchannel, sending vast amounts of data back to the black crystal ship we'd encountered in the Kuiper Belt, which Valerius had dubbed the Obelisk. They're not just broadcasting. Silas, now a reluctant but invaluable member of our intelligence team, explained. They're scanning, a passive, deep-level census, neurological patterns, genetic markers, emotional responses. They're mapping the human psyche. To find the outliers, Valerius concluded, his eyes narrowing, the ones who won't submit, the ones like us. It was a culling list. They weren't just pacifying humanity. They were identifying and cataloging anyone with the potential to resist for future integration. We had to cut the head off the snake. The mission was a ghost run. We took the newly christened Revenant, the name felt more fitting than Vulture now, and slipped into the Sol system using a series of calculated microjumps that left almost no energy signature. We approached the relay station under the cover of a solar flare, a phantom in the storm. We didn't fire a single shot. Jax and I boarded the station via a maintenance conduit, moving through the silent, automated corridors like wraiths. The station was staffed by compliance servitors, humans who had undergone a preliminary form of integration. Their eyes were placid, their movements graceful and unnervingly calm. They didn't fight back. They simply observed us, their heads tilting with a kind of mild curiosity as we planted our viral charges. The virus Silas had designed was a work of malicious art. It wasn't a bomb, it was a truth serum. When we activated it from a safe distance, it didn't destroy the relay, it hijacked it. For 12 minutes, every screen in the Sol system, from the public billboards in Times Square to the private datapads of Earth's elite, went black. Then, a single file played on a continuous loop Chief Science Officer Eris Thorne's final, terrified log from the Wanderer. It played without context, without explanation, just a woman's raw, unfiltered terror, the images of her crewmates melting into the walls, and her final, desperate warning: they are coming for our world, not to destroy it, but to perfect it. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. It was a crack in the mirror of paradise. The architects and their human puppets in EarthGov tried to spin it, calling it a fabrication, a terrorist broadcast by rogue elements. But the seed of doubt had been planted. People started asking questions. Whispers grew into arguments. For the first time, the architect's perfect narrative had been punctured, and it drove them to make their first mistake. They escalated. Compliance units, once operating in the shadows, began to appear on the streets, enforcing stability. Protests were met with a calm, efficient, and brutal suppression. People who questioned the official story began to disappear. The velvet glove was coming off. And for the first time, humanity was starting to see the iron fist beneath. Our war of shadows continued. We became whispers, a phantom menace striking from the dark. We hit their resource convoys, sabotaging shipments of the rare elements they needed for their terraforming and integration technology. We liberated data from hidden compliance servers, leaking proof of their abductions and re-education camps to the fledgling resistance movements that were starting to bubble up across the planet. We were fighting an idea, and our weapons were truth and fear. With every strike, we forced the architects to reveal more of their true nature, to tighten their grip and show the world the face behind the benevolent mask. Our most daring strike was on a re-education center established on Mars. It was a prison disguised as a university, where dissenters were taken to have their flaws corrected through a combination of psychological conditioning and low-level biological manipulation. Jax insisted on leading the ground team. It was personal. He saw the faces of the inmates, their eyes dull and compliant, and saw what he had almost become. We didn't go in with guns blazing. We went in as liberators. I piloted the Revenant on a low-altitude pass, using a modified sonic emitter to temporarily disable the center's internal security systems. Jax and his team went in hard and fast, not to kill, but to extract. They fought their way to the Central Processing Core, where the most prominent political and scientific minds who had dared to question the emissaries were being held. The battle in the sterile white corridors of the center was a brutal, close-quarters affair. Compliance troopers were there, but so were something new. Human guards who had willingly undergone partial integration. They were faster, stronger, and felt no pain. They fought with a serene, detached grace that was utterly terrifying. Jax met them with a berserker's fury. He used his cybernetic arm not as a tool, but as a battering ram, a shield, a weapon of pure, kinetic rage. He was the embodiment of the death world savagery the architects so despised, a walking, screaming refutation of their philosophy of peace through submission. We got the prisoners out, but we took losses. Good people died on the red sands of Mars. But as we jumped back to the nebula, we brought with us the leaders of the new human resistance, scientists, generals, philosophers, the very people Earth needed to lead the fight. Back at Ethelgard, we showed them the core, We showed them the truth. The resistance, once a scattered collection of disparate groups, was now unified, and it had a fleet Valerius's hidden armada. The war was about to come out of the shadows. But as we celebrated this small, bitter victory, Silas made a chilling discovery. The data we'd liberated from the Mars facility contained a fragment of the architect's master plan, their seduction of Earth, the suppression of dissent. It was all just Phase 1. Phase 2 was far more horrifying. They weren't just trying to perfect humanity. They were preparing Earth for something. The increased atmospheric oxygen, the subtle alterations to the planetary magnetic field, the massive construction projects in the deep oceans, they weren't for us. "They're terraforming," Silas said, his face pale in the glow of the holographic display. "They're changing Earth's environment to suit another species. Their true species, the emissaries, the graceful, beautiful beings who walked among humanity, were just a shell, a diplomatic interface. The true architects, the ones who piloted the obelisk, had never left their ship. They were preparing to move in." "It's not an invasion," I said, the horrifying realization dawning on me. "It's a colonization, and we're just the pests they need to clear out before the new owners arrive." The clock was ticking. The architects were no longer trying to seduce us. They were preparing to replace us. Our war of whispers was over. The next battle wouldn't be for humanity's freedom. It would be for its very existence. The final revelation landed not like a bombshell, but like a shroud. Colonization. Replacement. We weren't fighting for our freedom. We were fighting to not be erased from the book of existence. The knowledge settled a cold, hard calm over Ethelgard. The frantic energy of preparation was replaced by the quiet, methodical deadliness of a species with its back against the wall. There were no more debates, no more strategies for a prolonged war. There was only one path left, a single all-or-nothing strike at the heart of the beast. Valerius stood before the assembled pilots and soldiers in the main hangar, a ghost fleet ready to fight a war the rest of humanity didn't even know was happening. He didn't give a rousing speech. He simply laid out the truth. "The architects are completing their primary terraforming engine," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "A stratospheric converter they call the World Forge. Once it activates, it will initiate a cascading atmospheric collapse. The air we breathe will become poison to us within 72 hours. They will not have to hunt us down. They will simply wait for us to suffocate on our own world." A hologram of the forge shimmered above him. It wasn't a ship. It was a crown of thorns built in high orbit over the Pacific. A web of crystalline structures and energy conduits miles wide, with the menacing black shape of the obelisk docked at its center like a spider in its web. "Our objective is twofold," Valerius continued, his gaze sweeping over us. "The main fleet, under my command, will engage the emissary and compliance armada in a full frontal assault. We will be outnumbered and outgunned. Our purpose is not to win. Our purpose is to be so loud, so violent, so utterly catastrophic that they cannot look away. We will be the distraction." He then looked directly at me. "While we are dying, the Revenant will perform a surgical strike. You will use the chaos of the battle as cover, breach the forge, and destroy its primary power core. You will not be reinforced. You will not be extracted. You succeed, or you will be the last human beings to die fighting for a world that no longer exists." It was a suicide mission wrapped in a suicide mission. and every single person in that hangar nodded in grim acceptance. We were Deathworlders. This was the only way we knew how to live, by being willing to die. The hours before the battle were a study in silent ritual. Anya recalibrated the Revenant's energy systems, her fingers flying across the consoles with a dancer's grace, her face a serene mask of concentration. Jax sat alone in the armory, meticulously field stripping and reassembling his weapons, his cybernetic hand moving with a precision that belied the storm of rage in his eyes. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. I found myself on the observation deck, staring into the swirling gases of the nebula, the data core resting on the console beside me. I played Eris Thorne's final log one last time, listening to the terror in her voice. She had died thinking of humanity as flawed, as clay for a monstrous artist. I was about to prove her wrong. Our savagery wasn't a flaw. It was our shield. It was our sword. It was the sacred fire we had carried out of the caves and into the stars, and we would not let it be extinguished by a cold, sterile perfection. Then, it was time. The ghost fleet of Ethelgard jumped into the Sol system in a single, coordinated, breathtaking burst of defiance. We emerged on the edge of Earth's orbital space, a swarm of angry hornets charging the gates of heaven. The battle that followed was not a battle. It was an apocalypse. Valerius's fleet, a collection of outdated warships and retrofitted freighters, slammed into the pristine, elegant lines of the Architect and Compliance Armada. Our ships were blunt instruments of rage against their surgical tools of control. We were dying, just as Valerius had promised. Explosions blossomed in the silent dark like fleeting, violent flowers. I watched a human frigate, its engines bleeding fire, turn and ram itself into the side of a compliance cruiser, a final act of pure, glorious spite. In the midst of this beautiful, terrible chaos, the Revenant was a ghost. Anya piloted us through the storm of debris and energy beams, her eyes tracking 1,000 variables at once, finding a path where none should exist. We slipped through the outer defensive perimeter of the World Forge, the battle raging behind us, a distant, silent light show. "We're in," she announced, her voice barely a whisper. "Hull integrity at 80%. I'm taking us to the primary conduit junction. It's the only place we can breach without triggering an immediate structural collapse." The interior of the forge was a nightmare of alien architecture. It was a living machine, with corridors that seemed to breathe and walls that pulsed with a soft, blue light. Our target was deep in the center, a chamber that housed the energy core that drew power directly from the obelisk. We docked with a jolt, and the three of us stood at the airlock, weapons ready. For a moment, we just looked at each other. No words were necessary. We were the last argument of a species that refused to go quietly. Then Jax slammed the breach charge, and the door blew inward. We moved through the alien corridors, a trinity of human fury. Compliance troopers met us, but they were no match. They were trained for suppression, for control. We were trained in the art of survival. We were faster, dirtier, more alive. But then we encountered the Architect's true defenders. They weren't human. They were biomechanical constructs, floating spheres of polished chrome and organic tissue that fired beams of coherent energy that didn't just burn, but unraveled matter on a molecular level. We reached the core chamber, a vast, cathedral-like space that hummed with unimaginable power. In the center, A sphere of pure, white energy pulsed, held in place by massive, crackling pylons. And floating before it, observing their work, were the true architects. They were not the graceful emissaries. They were beings of nightmare and geometry, towering biomechanical frames that housed shimmering, non-corporeal entities. They were ancient, cold, and utterly indifferent. They turned their faceless heads toward us, not with alarm, but with a faint, clinical curiosity, like a scientist noticing an unexpected variable in an experiment. Anya, the core, I yelled, laying down a spread of fire at the nearest construct. Anya sprinted for a control terminal, jacking in her data spike, her fingers a blur as she fought against alien code. Jax became a whirlwind of destruction. He was no longer a man. He was a force of nature. He roared, a raw, primal sound of pure defiance, and charged the constructs, his cybernetic arm a battering ram, his scattergun barking defiance. He was buying us seconds with his own blood and fury. "I'm in," Anya shouted, "but it's shielded. The energy conduits are self-repairing. To trigger a feedback loop, I have to manually sever the primary relays. Someone has to hold the overload cycle open from this console. It was a death sentence. To do so meant being at the epicenter of the explosion. Before I could even speak, a massive construct swatted me aside like a fly, sending me crashing into a far wall. My vision exploded in a starburst of pain. As my senses cleared, I saw it advancing on Anya's exposed back. Then, Jax was there. He threw himself in front of her, his body taking the full force of an energy beam, his armor flash vaporized, his flesh burning away to reveal the gleaming metal of his skeleton. He screamed, but he did not fall. He turned, his one good eye locking onto my own, and in that gaze, I saw not pain, but peace. They called us savages. Kale. He rasped into the calm, his voice a distorted gargle. He then looked at the towering, indifferent form of the architect before him. "Let me show them what a savage can do." He slammed his cybernetic fist into the control console Anya had just abandoned, forcing the overload into a runaway cascade. Then, with his last ounce of strength, he charged the architect, a burning, dying star of pure human rage. I grabbed Anya, dragging her away as the core began to scream, its light shifting from white to a blood red. We threw ourselves into a service conduit just as the world behind us ceased to exist. The feedback loop didn't just destroy the forge. It traveled up the power conduit and ripped the heart out of the obelisk. The spider died with its web. We made it back to the Revenant as the entire station tore itself apart around us. We launched into a sky no longer filled with the chaos of battle, but with the silent, drifting wreckage of two fleets. The architects, their command structure shattered, had fallen into disarray and were being systematically hunted down by Valerius's remaining forces. It was over. We had won. Anya slumped into the pilot's seat, silent tears tracing paths through the grime on her face. I stood beside her, my hand on her shoulder, and watched our homeworld rise above the horizon. It was scarred, wounded, but it was still blue. It was still ours. There were no victory parades, no medals. Our war ended as it had begun, in the silent dark, with only the ghosts of our fallen for company. Earth was saved, but it was forever changed. Humanity had looked into the face of a cold, indifferent universe that judged it unworthy, and it had answered with fire and blood. We were no longer a scattered, naive species dreaming of peaceful exploration. We were survivors. We were the children of a death world, forged in violence and tempered by loss. That savagery the architects had so despised, our stubborn, irrational, glorious will to fight for every last breath, it hadn't been our greatest flaw. It had been our salvation. And if any other gods or monsters ever came calling from the silent dark, they would find us waiting, our weapons hot and our hearts full of the beautiful, terrible fire that now defined us. We were no longer just human. We were a warning,